Welcome to This Lawyer's Life, a podcast of the New York City Bar Association. Today we meet Muhammad Faridi. Muhammad is president of the New York City Bar, a partner at Patterson Belknap, and the independent civilian representative for New York City's Handschu committee. Muhammad is 5 months into his 2-year term as City Bar president. We talked about how he decided to take the position and what it means to him personally and professionally.
It'd be a good thing for the many, not just Muslims, but also other people of color, people who come from marginalized communities, to see me in that role.
Muhammad has defended victims of police violence, refugees, and foreign nationals held at Abu Ghraib, all while scoring billions and numerous wins for his commercial litigation clients.
I don't think there is anything fundamentally inconsistent in maintaining a robust private practice and a pro bono practice. And in some ways, the two practices complement one another.
Muhammad is a co-editor of the definitive Commercial Division Practice Guide, so his perspective on AI's entry into the legal world lands with special weight.
The possibilities in how we can leverage and incorporate AI are endless. And there's a way we can use AI to further enhance our intellectual capabilities when it comes to legal reasoning and legal writing. What I expect and what I want our association to do, and we've already begun to do a lot of that work, is to analyze whether and how to regulate AI that has the potential of generating conduct that amplifies existing biases.
Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. Here's your host, Gregory Binstock.
Welcome to This Lawyer's Life, a professional development podcast where we talk with lawyers about seizing opportunities, learning lessons the hard way, and about what makes them tick. I'm Gregory Binstock, Director of Professional Development here at the New York City Bar Association, and today I have the pleasure to chat with Muhammad Faridi. Muhammad Faridi, you're a partner in the litigation department of Patterson Belknap. In May 2024, you were elected as the president of the New York City Bar Association, which is, of course, a 154-year-old organization comprising over 22,000 lawyer members. Prior to being elected as the New York City Bar Association's president, you previously held other positions at the City Bar, including chair of the board of directors and chair of several other committees. You've been a professor at Fordham Law, a member of the New York City Mayor's Advisory Committee on the Judiciary, and in February 2023, you were appointed by New York City Mayor Eric Adams as the independent civil representative to the New York City Police Department's Handschu Committee. And now you're here with us. Welcome, Muhammad. We are so glad to have you join us. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Good to be talking to you.
Muhammad, everywhere we read about you and hear about you, you're called the first and the youngest, the first Muslim American president of the City Bar, and also the youngest president. These monikers seem to follow you around. Would you tell us about your pathway into the legal profession and how you became the first and the youngest to achieve so much in your legal career?
I guess I would begin by saying that I've been very lucky in the mentors, the friends, the siblings, and the parents that I've had. Both my parents were immigrants from Pakistan, and my parents came here. My father came in the late 1980s. I came with my mother and my siblings in the mid 1990s to the US. And there's one thing that my parents, even though they have very limited education, always underscored to me and to my siblings, and that's the importance of education. And my parents realized very early on that education is something that is transformational in nature, and they struggled a lot to ensure that me and my siblings, my brother and my sister, had a lot of opportunities, had the time and the resources to be able to go to school. And over the years, I've been aided by many friends and mentors, to folks I met at the Bar Association, folks who I met at the firm, folks who I met in the profession, and folks who I met in my prior life as a livery cab driver before I became a lawyer. I remember sitting in the parking lots at JFK Airport waiting to pick up a fare. And these men who were all much older than me, people who were in their 40s and 50s and 60s, my father's age, always told me that, hey, you're here to make money and you're driving a cab, but don't forget about that homework. Go back, go into your taxi cab while you wait for the fare and get that reading done. We know you have homework to do, so don't come hang out with us. Get back in the car and do your studying. And my father did the same exact thing. I drove with him. He was a cab driver, just retired a couple of years ago. He drove the day shift. I drove the night shift. And he called me pretty regularly when I was working in the nights, and he knew I was waiting for a fare, and he would say, have you done your homework? If you need to come home to finish up that paper, feel free to do so. That's much more important. So I think it's because of all of that mentoring and coaching over the years from all of these people who've touched my life. I've been lucky enough to be the first Muslim American president of the Bar Association, and been able to do many other things.
And how has taking on the presidency of the city bar changed your day-to-day practice and your day-to-day routine?
I'm really enjoying it. It really has affected me and my, obviously, work-to-life balance, my professional practice in a very profound way. So the first thing is that I'm getting to meet with a lot of really interesting people, the chairs of the 150 or so committees that we have at the Bar Association, meeting with them on a regular basis to learn about their priorities, what they want to do in their committees, the substantive work that they want to do. And I'm really enjoying that. Relatedly, our association does a very good job in putting out really important substantive work product for the profession, for the bar, for the public at large to digest and to consider. And I'm responsible for taking a look at and weighing in every committee report, every statement, every letter to a legislator or a senator that our committees and our association wants to put out. And just taking a look at all of that and getting to learn a little bit about the many different issues and subject matters that our bar association touches has been a lot of fun. I'm very lucky in that my firm, Patterson Belknap, and my clients have been very generous to me and have given me the green light to take on all of this additional work. Yeah, but there's only so many hours in the day, and I find myself working really long hours. One of our outgoing presidents, who I met with before I took on this responsibility, Roger Maldonado, I asked him when he called me and asked me if I was interested in this role. I asked him, how'd you get it done? And he said that he had heard from another prior president, I think John Kiernan, that what John did was that he devoted 75% of his time at the Bar Association and then the other 75% at the firm.
Right.
And I feel that I'm doing that. And obviously that affects our family life. Lila and I, we have 3 young children. My family has been very supportive. My children, although they are young, they fully understand the demands on my time. And so I've been very lucky in that regard.
Can we delve into that work-life balance issue a little bit? For our listeners who don't know, you'll be serving a 2-year term as city bar president, and you keep your day job, as you mentioned. Obviously, there's your family life. Is there an illustration of a conversation you have with your firm or on a professional level or on the personal level where you really say, this is something I'm considering, this is what changes I'm anticipating? How do you approach that at the Patterson level when you're considering something? I mean, it's a great honor, obviously, but it clearly is going to change your time.
Yeah, and I had that conversation with multiple people at Patterson. I had that conversation with some of my clients and had that conversation with family members and my friends. The unique thing about Patterson is that I think our leadership at the firm fully understands the role that lawyers have in issues that affect our society at large. A lot of our founding fathers at the firm had significant careers in public service, and after they came to the firm, continued to do public interest work, pro bono work. And in fact, the named partner of Patterson, Judge Patterson, was a president of the Bar Association in the 1940s. So it was a very easy conversation to have at the firm, and the firm as soon as I mentioned this possibility, was fully supportive of me taking on this role. When I spoke with my friends and my mentors, they were equally encouraging. And, I knew that I have the possibility to do this a little bit later in my career, but I decided that it was important to do it now. I think mainly for two reasons. One is I think it's important for the community that I come from to have me in this role. And that's what a couple of my friends who are from my community underscored to me, that it's important, given where we are in the circumstances that we live in, for a Muslim to lead the City Bar Association. And it would be a good thing for our community. It would be a good thing for the many, not just Muslims, but also other people of color, people who come from marginalized communities, to see me in that role. And I think the second consideration, perhaps equally, if not more important, is that my parents are aging. And they've worked really hard over the years, and they're proud of me and my siblings and my friends who I grew up with. And I wanted them to see me in this role before too much time passes. So that was equally, if not more important. And I thought that I owed it to the community that I come from and my family to be able to take on this responsibility now. It's been difficult. I'm extremely busy in my professional life at the firm. Just in the last couple of years, I've had several trials which require a significant amount of time and effort. I was constantly on the road, appearing for a court conference here or there, or taking a deposition here and there, meeting with a client or a witness in California or Texas or Chicago. So that was a key consideration if I'm going to be able to make time for this important role at the Bar Association. And would I do it fairly and adequately? Because I did not want to sign up for something where I would not be able to get my 100%. I've been lucky that I've been able to maintain that balance, where I think that my clients, my firm, believe that I'm continuing to be productive there. And I think I'm being equally productive at the Bar Association.
You mentioned the importance and the value of you holding the positions that you do and being able to set an example for people in the Muslim community. Who in your young life, who were the lawyers that set an example for you? Who demonstrated to you that was something that you could do?
Several people in the Muslim legal community in New York and the US at large who serve as my friends and my role model, one of whom I have the privilege of calling a good friend, and that's Adil Mangi, who is one of my partners at Patterson Belknap. And Adil is one of the folks who I went to very early on in the process when I was asked to consider this role as the president of the association. And he encouraged me. In fact, he implored me to take on this role. And he is one of the leaders of the Muslim legal community, and his perspective is something that I value. So as soon as he gave me the green light, I said, okay, this is time to take on the role.
I wanted to ask how you're envisioning your first 2-year term here at the City Bar, and how have you taken your first steps?
So the last couple of months have been eye-opening in terms of the work that the association does. I've been a member now for almost 20 years, and I've been a relatively active member, but I have a newfound appreciation of the areas of law that we touch at the association, the work that we do in the provision of pro bono legal services, the work that we do in analyzing cutting-edge issues and weighing in on them, and the work that we do in law reform, identifying areas for the legislators and others in public service to consider. So in terms of measurable goals, one of my goals is, number one, just to continue the tradition that we have at the association of weighing in on all of these issues. And frankly, the continuation of that longstanding tradition is probably the most important goal. If I can continue that tradition, I think I would consider my work as the president of the association to have been completed. That being said, if every president of the association comes in with a few items that they want to focus in on during their term, and I've got a few items on my list. One of the issues that I'm pretty passionate about is the need for some level of reform in the New York State court system. I think this is a little bit controversial, but I think our state court system needs an overhaul to bring it in to the 21st century, mindful of the need perhaps to preserve some of the tradition. But I think we do need some changes. And I think a lot of people who practice in New York believe that change is warranted. And one example of that change is to repeal the constitutional cap that we have in New York on the number of Supreme Court justices that can be elected in a particular judicial district. And that cap is outdated. There's no need for it. And our association has been pushing for the repeal of that cap now for some time. And I'm hoping that in my term as the president of the association, we're able to put that repeal measure on the ballot. The second thing I think I want to focus on, and I've been focusing on at the association, is on the DEI front. So we've got a number of committees that focus on DEI issues. We actually have a very robust office at the association, headed by Tanya Martinez Galanucci, who focuses on DEI issues. It's the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging. And I have a couple of programs in mind that I've been talking to Tanya about, and you'll see us roll those out in the next couple of months. The third is, and as we were talking about earlier, the analysis, the role of artificial intelligence in a variety of issues that we spoke about earlier. And I'm hoping that during my term as president, we're able to generate some substantive work product that we can put out for the public at large and for policymakers to consider as we deepen our understanding of the role of AI and whether and how it needs to be regulated.
I want to ask you about a different type of balance, which is to say how you combine your priorities in litigation and your pro bono work, which I know you're passionate about. Tell us a bit about how that balance comes into play for you. And now that we're moving into the fall, unbelievably, we're in mid-September as we're recording this. What would you tell first-year associates that are starting this fall about their place in the community and the role that pro bono work has had for you and what it can mean to them?
Yeah, when I became a lawyer, I made a commitment to myself that I was going to maintain a healthy pro bono practice for as long as I was in private practice. And I don't think there is anything fundamentally inconsistent in maintaining a robust private practice and a pro bono practice. And in some ways, the two practices complement one another, and a pro bono practice is equally necessary, I think, in having a fulfilling legal career. So I think the first thing is you've got to sort of make a commitment to yourself early on in the career as to what amount of time you want to allocate to your pro bono practice, and check yourself at the end of every year or every other year to see if you've lived up to that commitment. I think the most important thing to do in instilling a passion for pro bono work in the more junior lawyers is to really lead by example. Now, I'll give you an example here. When I joined my firm Patterson Belknap in 2008, I was working on a very large and highly complex commercial matter with another partner at the firm, a senior partner at the firm, who was extremely busy in his commercial practice. But he and we signed up to represent an indigent family in Westchester. And we represented a grandmother and her grandson who were being evicted out of the housing complex that they lived in because the grandson retaliated against his bullies, who were picking on him in the hallways and in the common areas of the apartment building. And this child who was a client of ours had suffered a tremendous amount of trauma in his life. And obviously there's nothing that justifies the actions that he took. But in response to some bullying and repeated threats and beatings, he retaliated against one of his bullies by punching him in the face. And the bullies did not live in the building, but the occurrence was a breach under the terms of the lease agreement. So we had to fight the eviction for this family, and this family would have been thrown into the streets if they were evicted out of this apartment building where they lived for several years. And this partner who I was working with had basically pulled an all-nighter working for our commercial client. But there was a board meeting, I remember, on Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. And he needed to prepare for that board meeting of the client. And Tuesday evening, I think he must have slept maybe an hour or two to prepare for that board meeting at 9 a.m. And I was supposed to meet with our pro bono client around 11:30 or noon up in Westchester. So after he finished his board meeting at 10 a.m. on that Wednesday morning, he drove up to Westchester to participate in that meeting that we were having with our pro bono client. And that underscored to me the importance that people like him, who are extremely successful professionally at the firm with our commercial clients, the importance that he put on pro bono work. Our pro bono clients, his pro bono client was no different than his billable client. And I've tried over the years to emulate that, perhaps by a fraction. In the pro bono matters that I've taken on, I work on them try to work on them with as much zeal as I do when it comes to my commercial billable clients. And I think when junior lawyers see that, I hope that they find some inspiration in that. Yes, you can have conversations with folks and tell them pro bono work is important, and everyone knows that it's important. I don't think that's the issue. But once folks see you lead by action, as I did when it came to that particular instance from 2010, 2011, that was a lesson that was learned and hard to forget. And that inspired me as well.
What are the issues that your service on the City Bar's Committee on Recruitment and Retention of Lawyers brought to your attention? And what are the key recruitment and retention issues that the City Bar should be focusing on right now for its lawyers to take to heart and bring to their own organizations?
Right. The Committee on Recruitment and Retention focuses on ensuring that we are able to recruit and retain a diverse set of lawyers in the profession. And the focus of that committee for the last 35 years or so has been on a diverse profession. And it was that committee working with our president in the early 1990s, Conrad Harper, that issued these principles on diversity that many of the leading law firms in the city signed. So when I got involved, my involvement with that particular committee goes back to 2004, 2005, when I was a law student. But the committee is responsible for putting together the 1L Diversity Fellowship, which has been a focus of that committee now for the last 35 years or so. And the fellowship places rising 2Ls, folks who've completed their first year in law school at prominent in-house law departments and law firms for a summer associateship in that first summer out of law school. And I was a recipient of that fellowship when I was a rising 2L, when I had finished my first year at CUNY Law School, when I was placed at MetLife. So I'm a beneficiary of that committee's good work. And I think that fellowship probably helped me accomplish a lot of things that I've done over the years. So I've always been very fond of that committee and the work that it does. So a few years ago, I was asked to co-chair that committee alongside with Michelle Cerezzo-Natal, who's one of the leaders of the Bar Association. And I got to learn a bit more about DEI issues and the role that our association can play in them. My focus at the Bar Association beforehand had been on death penalty matters and international human rights issues. Those were the committees that I had joined before. This was my first time getting involved with the association's diversity efforts. So one thing that I came to learn relatively quickly through my involvement on that committee is obviously there's been a tremendous amount of progress in the profession in the last 20 years or so in the recruitment of lawyers. There's been quite a few very good pipeline programs that have introduced the legal profession to people coming from marginalized communities. We've seen at some point, I think about a decade ago or so, we saw as many women in law school as men, and that was very encouraging. But notwithstanding all of the progress that we have made, we still are lacking as a profession in our diversity efforts. I think if you compare the legal profession relative to, let's say, the medical profession, there's fewer lawyers from diverse backgrounds than, let's say, you have physicians from diverse backgrounds. And I think the data is actually relatively bad when you look at leadership roles in law firms and also, I think, in-house law departments. Women lawyers and other lawyers from historically underrepresented groups, you're not going to find them in partnership ranks in the same way that you find, let's say, white Caucasian men. So we've got our work cut out for us. And I think, unfortunately, some of the decisions that our Supreme Court has handed down over the last few years has made it, difficult to work on this important issue. Employers feel that they will suffer liability if they sponsor DEI pipeline or fellowship programs. They feel intimidated by folks who will take them to court. And we've seen already a few lawsuits filed against some of the most prominent firms in America for the DEI work or the efforts in DEI work that those law firms have made. I think it's time for us as a profession to recommit to DEI efforts. I think law schools can do a better job in recruiting students from historically Black colleges and universities. I think undergraduate programs can do a better job in educating undergraduate students about the legal profession. I think we as a profession can do a better job in trying to encourage youngsters to consider the profession, go to high schools and middle schools and elementary schools on law day to talk about why it's important to consider becoming a lawyer, talk about the work that we do, not just for the commercial interests that we represent, but also for the non-commercial clients that we all represent.
The New York City Bar Association is a dynamic community of over 23,000 legal practitioners. Members shape the future of the legal profession, serve the public, and gain an edge in their careers. To learn more about becoming a member of the City Bar or to join today, visit nycbar.org/join. Save 20% on semi-annual dues when you join. Call Customer Relations at 212-382-6663 and use code POD24.
Muhammad, I know you're a prolific legal writer. I know you're the co-editor of a New York commercial division guide. Can you tell us about how your legal writing skills have intertwined with your career as a legal advocate, and anything you would share with us about the core skill of legal writing?
Yeah, for me, writing is frankly a very painful process.
Okay.
It always takes much more time than you originally expect and anticipate that it would. And beginning to write the beginning parts of a brief or an essay or a monograph are always difficult for me. And for me to move on to writing section 2 or section 3 of the brief, think that I need to have perfected section 1, and it's hard for me to move on from that into the subsequent pages or the subsequent sections. I have benefited over the years from coaching in legal writing, and I still get to receive coaching. And it's an iterative process, a very time-consuming process. It's a very intimidating process. But what I enjoy about it the most at the same time is reading the final polished work product. I often go back the day after I file a brief to take a look at it and enjoy reading it because a lot of work went into it, and it was a labor of love. One thing that I've learned to do over the years from watching other people write and from receiving coaching from some of the legal writing instructors and reading books about legal writing is that it's important to get all of the concepts down on a piece of paper in an unrefined form. So the section 1, the first section of the brief, doesn't need to be in perfect prose and doesn't need to have perfect syntax and grammar before you write the second and the third sections of the brief. Because the reality is, and as it has been in my case, even after you think that the first section of the brief is perfect, I will end up rewriting it in its entirety after I finish the second and the third sections, because you always go back and it's an iterative process. So I think that's important. The other thing that's important is, in order to be a good legal writer, I think it's really important to read good legal writing. So many times I will go and I'll take a look at the briefs that are filed in some of these high-stake Supreme Court cases or the high-stake cases before our Court of Appeals, Supreme Court decisions that affect us professionally and also that affect our country at large. I think it's important to then, if you want to be a good legal writer, go take a look at the briefs that the Supreme Court considered. And from reading good legal writing, I think you can hopefully improve your own writing. And I think the third thing that I'll mention in this regard is, don't be afraid to completely set aside and scratch what you wrote. And a lot of writers, we feel intimidated or we don't feel comfortable setting aside the first draft and beginning anew. We think that because we have put in so much time and effort in the first draft of something, we have to use it and leverage it in the most optimal way. What I've done over the years is I'll work on something and come back to it 2 or 3 days later, and I'll have a completely different perspective on it. And I have to, even though there is this natural temptation that I have, that to make minor or line edits to the initial draft and pass it on, I think you got to consider it anew, de novo. And don't be afraid, and I've learned this over the years, not to be afraid in making fundamental changes to the original draft. In some ways, the original draft is absolutely necessary to be able to engage in the process that you need to engage in, rewriting process 2 days later. And to be able to do that, you've got to give yourself ample time. So if you've got a brief that's due 21 days from today, don't begin working on it 1 week out. Work on it the first or the second day you get the assignment, write it, go work on something else for a day or two, and then come back and take a look at it again, because I think that will give you a completely different perspective. And I think this is the mistake that actually a lot of the junior lawyers make. And I made this mistake over the years. And the mistake is, you work on a brief, you get an assignment, let's say on a Monday, and you've got until Friday to turn it in. You begin working on it, let's say on Monday, and you think you're done with it by Wednesday. You submit it send it into the client and the partner on Wednesday. And then you don't go back and take a look at it and you wait for that person to turn around the next draft with their edits. No, go back and take a look at it on Thursday and on Friday. And because if you've gotten up until Friday, you can say to the partner or whoever you're working with, you can say, since I've got a little bit more time, I'm going to give you another draft a couple of days later. And you will just notice that the second draft that you'll turn out after you've had the benefit of some passage of time will be meaningfully better or different than the first draft.
You're touching on a lot here, but something that's resonating with me is that you're speaking about this in a way that I think a lot of people think about creative writing and less like technical writing. The anguish of staring at a blank page, the idea of writing as rewriting, the intertwining of reading and writing and how they reflect upon each other and help each other as a process over time, the idea of not necessarily knowing where you're going and letting the writing take you to a place that may not have been clear to you from the beginning. So I find that fascinating. But I also want to then ask you, is AI going to change that?
Yeah. Before I get to the AI issue, good legal writing is not meaningfully different from creative writing. And if you go and take a look at the briefs that some of the leading practitioners in appellate courts write, they're fun to read. They may not be as good as reading a good biography or a good piece of fiction, but if they are fun to read, you've done your job as an advocate because you've engaged your reader. And look, on the role of AI, yes, I think AI is going to fundamentally change the way we think about legal writing. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine the other day about leveraging AI and incorporating AI in the provision of legal services. And he said that what he's afraid of is that AI is going to make many of us intellectually lazy. What he's afraid of is, and we've seen some instances of this already, lawyers plugging in a few concepts into, let's say, ChatGPT or one of the other AI platforms and using whatever those platforms churn out as a work product. Yeah, and I too am afraid of that. But I also think at the same time that the possibilities in how we can leverage and incorporate AI are endless. And there's a way we can use AI to further enhance our intellectual capabilities when it comes to legal reasoning and legal writing. Just think about, for instance, how easy AI will make it for folks to begin to write a brief. You should obviously never take that and consider that to be the final work product. And there are all sorts of ethical issues and client confidentiality issues that you need to account for and take into consideration in evaluating whether you want to use an AI platform. But think about what would happen if you, instead of spending the 2 days on putting together the beginning portions of a brief, if you're able to put some concepts into a platform and have that platform do that work for you in a matter of seconds, and so that you can focus your efforts on the other things that require analytical rigor, that require a lot of intellect, and you can further sharpen the arguments and the writing because you haven't spent 24 hours in jotting down or writing down some basic concepts on a piece of paper. So, there is probably a balance that will need to be struck, and we're having the right conversations, right? That's what's important right now. I think it is too premature to say that AI is going to be bad for legal writing or AI is going to be good for legal writing. I think there are going to be aspects of AI that are going to be terrible when it comes to the provision of legal services and with legal writing. And there are probably going to be some aspects of AI that are going to make us better lawyers and make our system of the provision of legal services more efficient.
Muhammad, you clerked for Judge Jack B. Weinstein in the Eastern District. He passed away recently, and I was reading his obituary in the New York Times to prepare to speak with you. He had an incredible life, and he's a legend in terms of his judicial activism and his judicial imagination. So I wanted to ask you about your relationship with Judge Weinstein and his influence on your professional values.
Clerking for Judge Weinstein, it was probably and will continue to be probably the best legal job that I will have in my professional career. And when I've had finished clerking for him for several years afterwards, there wasn't a single day that went by that I did not think about my time clerking with him. And I still go back and think about my time clerking with him. He was a legal genius, and I actually thought that being a judge for him, being a jurist for him, being a lawyer for him was basically a cop out because he could have been out there doing other things for humanity and probably have had a bigger impact on our world. Because one thing with Judge Weinstein was that there were no limitations in his thought. There were no barriers that he was unable to overcome in his legal reasoning and in his intellect. I'll give you an example. When I first began clerking for him, I think it was my first week there, and my co-clerk, it was her first week there as well. The two of us accompanied the judge to an appeal by a couple of defendants in a criminal case who had been denied bail by the magistrate judge in the Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn. And they had appealed the bail denial to Judge Weinstein. And the judge listened very astutely to the arguments made by the government that because these individuals were allegedly made members of a crime family, there is some sort of a presumption of violence associated with them under Second Circuit case law. And they need to overcome that presumption in order to qualify for bail. And the judge heard the argument and very carefully. And ultimately, at the end, he said, I'm going to give these individuals bail. And he said, well, I know about the Second Circuit presumption on this issue. I disagree with the Court of Appeals, but I'm going to put a stay on my order for 15 days in order to give the government an opportunity to appeal this to the Second Circuit. And lo and behold, within the matter of a week or so, the Second Circuit vacated his grant of bail. What that signaled to me was the judge, albeit he was constrained by precedent and respectful of the precedent, as trial judges should be, was willing to push the envelope in achieving a result that he believed was consistent with our country's constitution and willing to challenge his colleagues on the bench in the higher court to reconsider their view. And he was not afraid to have that fight, as we can tell from many of the decisions that he's issued over the years, where he's been critical of Second Circuit and U.S. Supreme Court precedent. And our higher court should have been equally critical of some of the decisions that he issued. And that was quite refreshing, seeing that as a junior lawyer. And obviously, I think trial judges need to be mindful of binding precedent. And I think the judge was. I think the judge was very mindful of precedent. But where he saw an opening to either challenge that precedent within the constraints of the law, he was not shy about doing so. And that was quite a valuable experience very early on in my career.
You're the independent civilian representative to the NYPD's Handschu committee. Would you help our listeners understand what that commission is and what your role is?
Right. So Handschu is actually, I would go as far as to say that it's part of the fabric of New York City. And most New Yorkers don't know about it or don't know much about it. But it is an important tool in the oversight of the NYPD's ability to surveil criminal activity that has some nexus with political speech. So Handschu, the current process, stems out of a consent decree that was entered by Judge Haight in the Southern District many years ago. And it stems from a litigation filed in the 1970s by individuals who were surveilled by the NYPD back in the 1960s and the early 1970s. And the argument that they made was that their surveillance, which was basically based on the individual's political activities, was unconstitutional. And the case went on for several years. And ultimately, in the early 1970s, a consent decree was entered that established what's known as the Handschu Committee. The Handschu Committee is a committee that comprises, for the most part, of the leadership at the NYPD, and it meets on a regular basis to evaluate the propriety of certain investigations that the NYPD wants to undertake of potential criminal activity that has a nexus with political speech. The court at that time appointed a civilian representative to that committee who had the ability to participate in the discussions of the committee and also lodge an objection if that civilian representative believed that the committee was authorizing or the NYPD was undertaking investigations surrounding political activity that were not warranted. And that process has existed since the 1970s, with the exception that in the early 2000s, the role of the civilian representative was sunset. And ultimately, it was revived again in about 2017 or so as a result of another litigation brought against the NYPD by Muslim Americans who believed and alleged that they were being surveilled by the NYPD and that surveillance was unconstitutional. At that time, in connection to the settlement of that lawsuit, known as the Raza lawsuit, the role of the civilian representative on the Handschu Committee was revived. And Judge Stephen Robinson, former Southern District judge and then a partner at Skadden, was appointed as the civilian representative. And when Judge Robinson's term came to expire in 2022, I succeeded to his role. And interestingly, by the way, the very first civilian representative was Judge Harold Tyler, former Judge Tyler from the Southern District, who was appointed in that role as the first civilian representative when the committee was set up. And Judge Tyler was a partner in my firm at the time that he was given that role. So we've brought that role back to the firm. My job as a civilian representative is to participate in the work of the Handschu Committee and offer my view as to whether or not the investigations that the NYPD wants to undertake are appropriate or not, whether there is a showing made that there has been a sufficient amount of criminal activity that may be taking afoot that warrants surveillance by the NYPD. And this is an important role, I think, for someone from my community to have, because it's no secret that Muslim Americans have been the targets of government surveillance in the last 2.5 decades or so, and actually for many years beforehand. So I was really honored when the Muslim American community asked me whether I would be interested in this role. And ultimately, I think at the recommendation of the leaders of the community, the mayor appointed me in this role. The work is fascinating. I get to review information that the NYPD has put together about individuals and organizations that the NYPD believes are worthy of some scrutiny and investigation, and offer my views on those issues to the NYPD. And I have a pretty good relationship, I think, with my counterparts at the NYPD. I found them to be respectful of my view, and I think it's been a pretty good collaboration. And I also think that this Handschu process is something that perhaps can be and really should be emulated by other jurisdictions to ensure that there is a proper balance between the legitimate need of law enforcement to investigate what law enforcement may believe is potential criminal activity that's worthy of investigation, and the legitimate need of the public at large to ensure that political speech is not impaired and is not unnecessarily scrutinized and penalized.
In your speech to the annual meeting of the association on your first day as president, you said, "It is incumbent on our bar association to facilitate a dialogue among scientists, ethicists, public intellectuals, academics, and policymakers about the critical considerations of AI." Would you unpack for us what sort of dialogues you envision and why the city bar is the right venue for the intersection of these conversations?
Yes, I think we're still at the relatively nascent stages of development of AI. And we probably have in the AI world progressed in our understanding and the development of capabilities of AI than I would probably appreciate and I'm able to comprehend. But as I understand it, there's a lot more work to do. In my view, law is where ethics and morality interact with the regulation of human conduct. So, and there's perhaps no other area, technology, where that interaction between human conduct and ethics and morality is that profound. So, what I expect and what I want our association to do, and we've already begun to do a lot of that work, is to analyze whether and how to regulate AI that has the potential of generating conduct that amplifies existing biases. How do you regulate AI that is going to further isolate our children? How do you regulate AI that impedes human freedom, that impedes human choice, that impedes autonomy? We've seen examples of AI being used to manipulate people to work longer hours. How do we regulate that? And thinking about the Terminator series of movies, how do you regulate AI that has the potential of posing an existential threat to our world? We have the election coming up. So how do you regulate AI that creates deepfake content and that has the ability to sow discord and weaken public content in our institutions? And ultimately, perhaps I think most importantly, one thing we need to analyze is whether the dependency on AI is being used to enhance the fundamental aspects of our shared humanity, such as creativity, critical thinking, problem solving, or their destruction. So I really can't think of another forum other than the Bar Association where lawyers, technologists, ethicists, public intellectuals, policymakers can come to and have a dialogue and a debate about these issues. And it's not just an issue of whether or not to regulate in these regards, but how do you do it? What legislation should be enacted? How should courts be thinking about these issues? So, in the last couple of months, we've already begun to undertake this important work, and we're launching a task force on artificial intelligence and digital technologies that is actually going to be analyzing many of the issues that I've outlined. We pulled together practitioners, lawyers, machine learning engineers, ethicists, judges, academics to come together at our association and analyze these issues. And I hope that we're able to put out some work product that allows the public at large to think about these issues in a critical manner, that allows the legislators to think about these issues from a policy standpoint, and that allows professionals, lawyers, to think about these issues in the practice of law.
Muhammad Faridi, You have so much to share, and you share so much. We're really appreciative of your time. Thanks for coming on This Lawyer's Life.
Really enjoyed our conversation. Thank you for taking the time.
It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of This Lawyer's Life. Opinions expressed are those of the speakers and not necessarily of the City Bar. If you enjoy this podcast, please like and subscribe wherever you listen. Find more City Bar podcasts on Apple, Spotify, YouTube Music, iHeart, or at our website at www.nycbar.org/podcasts. Be sure to check out Building Belonging, a podcast that embraces authentic conversations about DEIB solutions by amplifying the most marginalized voices in the legal industry and exploring spaces others dare not. This podcast was produced and edited by Eli Cohen.